When we talk about climate change, it's clear that not all states across the United States are facing the same situation. Some regions are better prepared to handle the challenges ahead, while others may be on a path toward even greater disaster. According to the 2021 CoreLogic Climate Change Catastrophe Report, 14.5 million single-family homes and households were affected by major natural disasters that year. To put that into perspective, that's roughly 1 in 10 homes impacted by a natural catastrophe, with estimated property damage reaching a staggering $56.92 billion. Ironically, many areas that are at high risk of climate-related disasters are also seeing a significant increase in population. There are a few reasons behind this trend. For one, these regions often boast strong attractions, stunning coastlines, abundant job opportunities, or even a more laid-back lifestyle. Despite being aware of the potential risks and consequences, people are often lured by the advantages that these states have to offer. The climate crisis in the United States is driven by a combination of natural factors and human activities. One of the major contributors is the burning of fossil fuels like oil, gas, and coal. As greenhouse gas emissions rise, the average temperature across the U.S. has surged noticeably over the past few decades. In recent decades, there has been a dramatic increase in both temperatures and extreme weather events. The effects of these shifts are not only environmental but also social and economic. As the global average temperature climbs, we're witnessing more frequent heat waves, wildfires, hurricanes, and severe floods, each becoming more intense over time. From a social perspective, extreme weather often hits the most vulnerable communities the hardest. Low-income individuals, those living in disaster-prone areas, and the elderly are especially at risk. For example, the rising frequency of heat waves in large urban areas not only heightens health risks like dehydration and heat strokes, but also worsens conditions in substandard housing. Economically, the toll is equally devastating. Extreme weather events cost the nation billions of dollars annually. Wildfires in the western U.S., for instance, regularly destroy thousands of homes and businesses, displacing entire communities and forcing large-scale evacuations. In the United States, assessing climate safety involves a wide range of criteria to determine how vulnerable a region is to the impacts of climate change and how well it can respond to those risks. For example, the Northeast is particularly susceptible to storms due to its unique geographic and climatic conditions. This region's vulnerability stems from its proximity to the Atlantic Ocean, where many storms tend to form. The warmer waters of the Atlantic, especially during the summer and early fall, fuel the development of storms. One clear example is Hurricane Sandy, which struck New Jersey and New York in 2012, causing massive destruction and claiming over 230 lives along its path. The storm's damage was estimated at more than $70 billion. According to the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration, over the past 30 years, the frequency of major storms in the Atlantic has risen by roughly 25%. Many of these storms eventually track northward, hitting the Northeast and heightening risks for residents there. Wildfires also present a significant threat in the U.S., particularly in the western and southeastern regions. A combination of geographic features, climate, and shifting weather patterns makes these areas especially prone to large fires, particularly in regions rich with forests, shrubs, and grasslands. The western U.S., including states like California, Oregon, and Washington, frequently experiences prolonged droughts. Grasslands and forests dry out, becoming highly flammable. The National Interagency Fire Center reported that droughts in 2020 and 2021 heightened the risk of massive wildfires in the West. NOAA has noted that since 1980, the average temperature in the western U.S. has increased by 1 to 2 degrees Fahrenheit, further exacerbating the fire risk. One of the deadliest fires in California's history was the 2018 Camp Fire, which destroyed over 18,000 buildings and claimed 85 lives. The fire was fueled by a combination of strong winds, drought, and dry vegetation. And then there was the 2021 Dixie Fire, the second largest fire in California's history, which burned through more than 960,000 acres and devastated hundreds of homes. Heat waves have also become a major concern in states like Florida, Texas, and Arizona, where temperatures frequently soar to extreme levels. Florida, already known for its tropical humid climate, experienced record highs in 2023, with temperatures in some areas exceeding 100 degrees Fahrenheit. The intense humidity in Florida only amplifies the heat, making it feel even hotter. Texas, meanwhile, faces annual heat waves that have become a serious issue. Data from Texas AAANDM University shows that these heat waves have led to more than 100 heat-related deaths. Extreme heat can cause severe health issues like dehydration, heat stroke, and organ failure, with people lacking access to air conditioning, such as the homeless, being the most vulnerable. In 2021, approximately 700 people across the U.S. died from the direct impacts of heat waves. When assessing climate safety in the United States, it's not just geographic factors that come into play. The strength and preparedness of a region's infrastructure are equally important in determining how well an area can cope with the effects of climate change. Infrastructure like roads, bridges, water systems, and buildings must be designed to withstand natural disasters. One of the most critical components of this infrastructure is the power grid. Extreme weather events, such as heat waves and snowstorms, can knock out electricity for extended periods, crippling communities. Similarly, the condition of road networks and transportation systems is vital when evaluating climate readiness. These systems not only support daily life, but also play a crucial role in evacuation and recovery efforts during disasters. The evaluation of climate safety in the U.S. is also heavily influenced by environmental policies at both the federal and state levels. Federal policies like the Clean Air Act and the Paris Agreement aim to reduce greenhouse gas emissions and mitigate the broader impacts of climate change. Additionally, many states enforce strict regulations on polluting industries. California, for example, has a cap-and-trade program that controls carbon emissions by setting limits and allowing the trade of emission permits, which encourages industries to reduce their environmental footprint. States that actively protect natural ecosystems, such as forests and wetlands, are also seen as better prepared for climate challenges. These ecosystems act as natural carbon sinks and help reduce flooding by absorbing excess water. In Florida and Louisiana, where rising sea levels and hurricanes pose a constant threat, efforts to protect wetlands are being strengthened to reduce the risk of flooding. Michigan emerges as one of the most ideal states in terms of climate safety. Known as the Great Lakes State, it ranks first in climate change assessments, performing consistently well across key categories, landing in the top 20 out of 48 states. Michigan also earned a commendable B grade for preparedness from Climate Central, reflecting its strong resilience against the effects of climate change. Vermont secures the second spot, largely due to its low risk of extreme heat. In fact, even under a low emissions scenario, the Union of Concerned Scientists projects that Vermont will only experience 1 day per year with a heat index above 100 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050. Additionally, Vermont's population is relatively less vulnerable to extreme heat, with only about 1.76% of residents under the age of 5 or over 65 living in poverty, reducing overall susceptibility to heat-related impacts. Pennsylvania ranks third, with droughts not expected to be a significant issue as we move further into the 21st century. The state also received an A in Climate Central's Preparedness report card, indicating that Pennsylvania is well equipped to handle various climate threats, ensuring the safety of both its environment and its residents. Colorado, despite facing considerable risks from wildfires and water scarcity, has the lowest vulnerability to extreme heat among U.S. states. Like Vermont, Colorado is projected to experience only one day with a heat index above 100 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050, assuming a low emissions trajectory. Minnesota rounds out the top 5, partly due to its relatively low flood risk. A 2017 report from the NYU Furman Center found that only about 3% of Minnesota's population lives in 100 or 500-year floodplains. Additionally, data from Flood Factor indicates that over the next 30 years, the number of properties at risk of flooding is expected to increase by just 1.4%, highlighting the state's stable flood outlook. When it comes to the most at-risk states, Florida faces daunting climate change challenges, consistently ranking among the top 5 states for extreme heat and flooding. Even in a low-emissions scenario, Florida is expected to experience a dramatic increase in the number of days with a heat index above 100 degrees Fahrenheit by 2050. Projections show an increase of 61 days over historical averages, making extreme heat a persistent threat. Additionally, the state's vulnerability to sea level rise and tropical storms further compounds its risk. Mississippi ranks as the second most climate vulnerable state. Its population is one of the most exposed to extreme heat, with projections indicating that by 2050, the state could face 68 days per year with a heat index above 100 degrees Fahrenheit, even under low emissions conditions. As a Gulf Coast state, Mississippi is also highly susceptible to sea level rise and coastal flooding, ranking 9th in flood risk nationally. Louisiana, like Florida and Mississippi, faces extreme climate challenges, particularly in terms of heat and flood risk. Over the next 30 years, Flood Factor estimates a 62.8% increase in the number of properties at risk of flooding in Louisiana. This surge in flood risk, combined with extreme heat, poses severe threats to both the environment and population. Texas, a state with vast ecological diversity, ranks 4th for climate vulnerability. While coastal areas are regularly battered by hurricanes and flooding, the state also faces serious droughts and water shortages in its inland regions. Texas is frequently hit by devastating weather events, such as hurricanes, flash floods, and scorching heat waves, making it highly susceptible to the impacts of climate change. Arkansas rounds out the top 5 states most at risk from climate change. Rising temperatures are projected to create severe heat stress and elevate the risk of wildfires. Additionally, Arkansas has been slow to implement sufficient protective measures for its residents, earning a failing grade from Climate Central for its climate preparedness. The state's lack of infrastructure and policy initiatives to combat climate threats leaves it especially vulnerable. In contrast, states considered safer are often at the forefront of technological innovation aimed at addressing climate challenges. For instance, in California, numerous tech companies are pioneering smart grid technology, which allows for more efficient energy management and helps mitigate the impacts of extreme weather on the power supply. In Washington, green transportation initiatives are thriving. Cities like Seattle are implementing electric-based public transportation systems to reduce air pollution and greenhouse gas emissions. These efforts not only contribute to a cleaner environment, but also bolster the local economy through green jobs and sustainable infrastructure. In Florida, where tropical storms and rising sea levels are pressing concerns, mitigation efforts focus on bolstering coastal infrastructure. This includes building seawalls and restoring wetlands, which serve as natural buffers against flooding. The state has also invested in ecosystem restoration programs, which help preserve the natural landscape and reduce the long-term impact of climate-related disasters. Over the next 50 years, climate change projections for the United States indicate rising temperatures, more extreme weather patterns, and significant environmental and economic impacts. By 2070, the average temperature in the U.S. is expected to increase by between 1.1 degrees Celsius and 2.8 degrees Celsius, depending on the level of greenhouse gas emissions. Precipitation patterns will likely shift dramatically, with some regions experiencing severe droughts, while others face extreme rainfall and flooding. The western U.S., particularly California, is projected to endure more frequent and prolonged droughts, putting pressure on agriculture and water supplies. In contrast, the northeastern U.S. is expected to see an increase in heavy rainfall events, which will heighten flood risks. Coastal areas like Florida, Louisiana, and New Jersey will be particularly vulnerable, as sea levels are projected to rise by 1 to 4 feet by the year 2100, posing a serious threat to coastal infrastructure and communities. As temperatures rise and weather patterns shift, the map of climate safety in the U.S. could change dramatically. States like Texas and Arizona, which are already grappling with extreme heat, are likely to face even greater risks from wildfires and water shortages. These states could become far more hazardous for residents and businesses as these risks intensify. Conversely, northern states like Minnesota and Wisconsin, traditionally known for their colder climates, may become more appealing as they offer a refuge from rising temperatures and extreme weather. As heat stress and climate-related disasters increase in southern and coastal regions, these northern states could attract more people seeking safer and more stable environments. For communities in high-risk regions like Louisiana and Florida, the economic impacts could be devastating. Frequent natural disasters, hurricanes, flooding, and rising sea levels will likely result in escalating costs for rebuilding infrastructure and mitigating damage. A report from Pew Charitable Trusts warns that the costs of repairing infrastructure and addressing climate damages could run into the billions of dollars, further straining local and state budgets. As these climate risks mount, it is expected that local economies in these areas will face significant disruption, with long-term consequences for residents and businesses alike.